All right, everybody. Welcome in and welcome back to the voice of college football at Mark Rogers TV. This is your Notre Dame Georgia Tech pregame show. Obviously, we are live on YouTube at, again, Mark Rogers TV. He's the voice of college football. As you listen to this or listen back afterwards, make sure that you are, checking out markrogerstv.com. He's a guy that I've worked with quite a bit. I've been on this Notre Dame post-game show quite a few times over, the past season. Most of the time, I'm on here with my good friend Nathan Urbach, who's really kind of the guy that has headed this up quite a bit. And usually it's the two of us here. Today, Nathan was in South Bend. And so if you've ever been to a game in South Bend at Notre Dame Stadium, you know that there's really not really much of a way that we could have gotten Nathan in on this particular one. So I'm solo today. I'm going to ramble here kind of at the beginning as we wait for, some more people to kind of get in here and bring their comments. So throughout the show, if you've got comments and things, please let me know. And, feel free to ask questions, weigh into the things that I am talking about, because that interaction makes my life a lot easier here as a solo guy on this show today. And, I just like the interaction in general. So, today, Notre Dame on senior day in South Bend beat Georgia Tech convincingly by a final score of 55-0. As I was sitting here, kind of between game time and before clicking going live here, it was I don't know. It was sort of interesting. I mean, what do you say about a game like that? First of all, I gotta be honest. I was sort of surprised by how seemingly helpless Georgia Tech looked for most of this game. Obviously, they picked up a few yards on a couple of drives, but obviously not anything sustainable to be able to even get any points on the scoreboard. If you'd have asked me prior to this game, I don't think I would have told you that Notre Dame would have shut out Georgia Tech or really any team on their schedule. So obviously that's a good thing. We're going to go in. We're going to talk about the defense with more specifics here soon. And offensively, I think that the point that I'd like to make is look how far, regardless of how good or bad Georgia Tech is, look how far Notre Dame has come in the time that in the time that we saw them early on in the season struggle for, at least a bit against Florida State, struggle at times against Toledo, against the offensive line, with the offensive line, against Toledo's defensive line, I guess I should say. Really, I guess to give my sort of general thoughts on today and through 11 games this season as Notre Dame sits at 10-1, I got to be honest, I wish Notre Dame would have hit the ground running a little bit better than they had, certainly. I wish that Notre Dame, it didn't take quite so long to get continuity on the offensive line. I know that's something that the broadcast had talked about quite a bit in terms of, the difference now seems to be that Notre Dame, their offensive line is playing with chemistry and they're all on the same page. I wish some of those things had happened a little faster, because we're going to talk about things like the college football playoff. I think there's a chance that Notre Dame gets in. If you've been on here with Nathan and I over the past however many weeks that we've done this, or one of us has done this, let's put it that way. You've heard us say time and time again that, we refuse to believe that Notre Dame's, to let ourselves believe that Notre Dame is a college football playoff contender. But then it seems like week after week, especially these last 3 weeks, as we've kind of turned the corner and turned the page into November, Notre Dame looks more and more like a college football playoff contender, especially based on, what they've done over the course of, especially the last 3 weeks in particular. I thought at different times Notre Dame has looked really good throughout, the 11 games that they've played. And, but today, and as a couple of you, well, one of you is saying here in the chat, and we appreciate your comments. If you've got them, let them fly. You know, Notre Dame 2164 says that's the first complete game I've seen Notre Dame play. I guess I would sort of argue kind of the same. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily argue against that, although I will say that, you've seen flashes of some really good performances over really the month of November. And I mean, when I say the month of November, okay, in November, we've had a game against Navy. That was a 34-6 win at Virginia, which, I guess you could kind of say that, you might put a little bit of an asterisk by the Virginia game because, Virginia was out without their starting quarterback. And then obviously a 55-0 drubbing of Georgia Tech today. The bottom line is that this defense is playing really well. If you'd have told me that, take the North Carolina game kind of out of the equation for a minute. If you'd have told me that when I was in the stadium and I saw Kyle Hamilton go down against USC, if you'd have told me that over the course of, all their games in November thus far, that Notre Dame would have held all of their opponents without a touchdown for the entire month of November, I would have said that you were nuts. So really, I guess if there's anything to take away from Notre Dame right now, and as we talk about things like the college football playoff and such, there's something to be said for the fact that Notre Dame is hitting their stride at the right time. If and I think Doug Flutie said it to Doug Flutie. Listen to me. I think Drew Brees said it today on the NBC broadcast that, is Notre Dame good enough to be a playoff team? Absolutely. Absolutely. They're playing like one of the 4 best teams in college football right now. And that's why right now, I mean, it would be appropriate to see Notre Dame get the opportunity to play for a national title. Now, I say that and kind of what Drew Brees was touching on when he made those comments, and I agree with this, is that certainly, Georgia has put together an impressive resume at number 1. Certainly Alabama has looked really good at times, especially in the top 5. Certainly Cincinnati has looked really good at times. They beat Notre Dame, but has really kind of stumbled since then. Certainly Ohio State looks really good right now, especially with what they did to Michigan State today. Certainly there are a lot of teams that are, that look really good that you would like to see get a chance because they're playing really good right now, play for a title. And so, I'd love to see this expansion of the college football playoff. And I'd love to see that, the things that have been talked about made official, because right now Notre Dame would be in the mix. That you can't tell me right now that, Notre Dame as maybe a 6 or a 7 seed wouldn't go and give whoever it is in the college, for whoever ends up with, the 2 or the 3, wouldn't go give that team a pretty solid, good game. That wouldn't mean a little bit more than just a 1 game New Year's 6 type of a bowl game. So, I don't know. I think Notre Dame is playing at a level right now that would warrant them being able to play for a national championship in college football. So again, if you're just joining, which a few of you have come and go throughout the broadcast here today, if you're just joining, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I'm hosting today. I'm your host, Ben Belden. Like I say, you usually hear me on here with the usual host, Nathan Urbach. But like I say, Nathan was in South Bend to watch this game today with another one of our buddies that we've done some work talking about Notre Dame football throughout the years. So that's why I'm solo today. So if you have comments or you have things that you want to chime in about, by all means, I'm solo today, and sometimes getting behind the camera and talking is not the easiest thing to do. So if you've got things that you'd like to talk about, any opinions that you have about things that I say, or if you just want to stop in and say hello, by all means, leave something in the comments. I'll see them. And we'll certainly talk about that throughout the show. The goal is to stay here. We've been broadcasting now for about 10 minutes. We're trying to stay here for another hour or so. So today's today's game, to talk about that a little bit. First of all, I wasn't real vocal on Twitter today as I was around, and really that was because I was using my phone to to watch this Notre Dame game. But a lot of good things to say about this Notre Dame football team and about this particular game in general. A couple of my major takeaways, I guess. Notre Dame. Notre Dame's defensive line, man, was just absolutely astounding today. That was one of my biggest takeaways. And like I say, I was, real life takes over once in a while. I didn't get to sit on the couch and kind of watch this Notre Dame football game, from start to finish without interruption. I was moving around. I was watching a stream of the game and kind of just making some mental notes as the game went on. And man, it seemed like every time I looked down at my phone, there was a different Notre Dame guy in the backfield making a play, making a sack. And really, one of the more fun things to observe about this Notre Dame team throughout the season has been the consistency of the defensive line play and the absolute just unbelievable depth that they have at that position. That something for me, it has been, I've been on my podcast. I've been on this show, this post-game show. I've talked about, this on any Notre Dame publication that I've ever talked about on this year, whether I was a guest on another show or whatever. The play of guys like Jason Adamilola inside, and obviously Myron Tungavailoa Mosa, and Justin Adamilola, Isaiah Foskey, Howard Cross was getting into the backfield when he was in the game anytime he wanted to today. Jacob Lacey, all of these guys. I could sit here and name probably 5 more guys. Riley Mills, the guy that at the beginning of the year I thought would have a pretty big season in his role as he kind of gets a more increased role with Notre Dame moving forward. So that defensive line, man, you don't just shut out a team, I guess, 55-0 without some really great plays from that defensive line. And they're playing at a really high level, which is exactly why I think Notre Dame, as some people are saying in the comments right now, can absolutely play with the top teams in college football. Here's one question that, as we kind of talk about Notre Dame potentially getting into the college football playoff, that I'd like to address. Mike McDonald says, is there concern about the long road trip for Stanford? Getting up for that game will be a challenge. I sort of agree in ways and sort of disagree in ways. I think Notre Dame, if there's a game where you kind of think about there could be a little bit of a lull for Notre Dame, it might have been today. And the reason I say this is because, obviously today was senior day, and you might sort of think to yourself, and there's some truth in this, certainly, that on senior day, of course, it's your last time playing in South Bend. The seniors are going to be hyped up. Everybody else is going to be hyped up to get the seniors a win and a memorable one. And there's a lot of truth to that, but there's also the emotion that kind of goes with it, that sometimes can sort of detract from a football game. And I guess kind of what I'm saying is, it's hard to go through those emotions, to run out, to shake Brian Kelly's hand, hug Brian Kelly in the tunnel, have the whole 70,000 some plus cheering for you, have those emotions, take it all in one last time, and then go play a very physical football game. And so if there was going to be a game where there's a lull, I sort of think today would have been the day where you would have seen Notre Dame start a little bit slower. And ultimately, I don't think it would have changed the outcome of this game. You know what I mean? I think Notre Dame was always going to beat Georgia Tech pretty handily. But today, I think, would have been the day where if anyone was going to play sluggish for a little bit, it would have been today. Now, going out to Stanford, I mean, certainly there's always the point that Stanford used to be a big a rivalry game to a lot of extents. It is a big rivalry game for Notre Dame. Um, and I understand that. It's lost lost a lot of its luster, especially since Stanford isn't very good. There's always it seems like David Shaw has been on the hot seat for quite some time now, and as Stanford continues to struggle through the latter part of this particular season, that seat getting even just a little bit warmer, I guess you could say. And so, yeah, I mean, there's always with a long road trip with a team that's not very good. There's always the chance, I guess, for a little bit of a lull. However, I'm not really concerned about that. And the reason is this, like I just got done saying, today would have been a day where I'd have expect maybe just a little bit of sluggishness, playing in the cold, all of the emotion and all of that type of stuff. And we didn't see it. Notre Dame right now they're peaking, really. I mean, Notre Dame, this is exactly what you want a college football team to do if you're Notre Dame, if you're a Notre Dame fan. And, that peak is very, very apparent right now. I mean, this team early on in the season, if you'd have watched the first 3 or 4 games and said this team will compete for a college football playoff, you'd have probably been nuts if you'd have said that. If I'd have said that after week 4, I wouldn't be on the show anymore. I mean, Mark Rogers or whoever would have said, no, you're not welcome here. I mean, so honestly, I think that Notre Dame, the statement they made today is very indicative of where they're at. So really, no, I am not concerned about a lull. And, there was a lot made on Twitter. And, I don't know, Brian Kelly's press conference is probably ongoing. So I haven't had an opportunity to listen to what he said. But I don't think there's any looking ahead for Stanford. If you're Brian Kelly, obviously you're kind of rooting for some chaos right at the top if you're trying to get into the college football playoff, which is obviously always the goal at Notre Dame. But you're right exactly where you want your team to be because you're peaking from a talent standpoint and putting it all together standpoint. And then you're also, right on the outside looking in and that your team can't afford to have this lull. Now, if Notre Dame was sitting as, the top 2 team in the country or top 3 team or, already in the college football playoff picture, I'd probably be maybe actually a little bit more concerned, although if they were playing this good, maybe not. So I don't really think that the lull is going to happen next week. And Johnny Bays, thank you for chiming in. I know you've had a couple of comments here, and kind of agreeing with me here that the lull, if there was going to be one, I think it's this week. Got a a very generic John Doe comment here. Hi, John Doe, whoever you are. The Notre Dame defense is legit because of Marcus Freeman. Certainly, another one of my favorite things to talk about this Notre Dame football team is, obviously when you talk about how much better they've gotten from week 1 to week, however many games we've played. The defense is one of the things you talk about. I mean, there was some real concern at Notre Dame, especially if you watched that Florida State game or you watched them give up a couple of big plays in the home opener to Toledo and so on and so forth. But really the defense has if you can lose Kyle Hamilton and seemingly get better or at least more effective. Now, I know Notre Dame hasn't played world beaters on offense, and that has a lot to do with it too. But still, you don't hold teams, I guess, out of the end zone in the month of November without executing a really good scheme, without having really good players. And right now, I think, like I say, the most important and the most noteworthy thing about this Notre Dame defense is that they can do it with anybody. They're going to give up some yards between the 30s, between the 20s a little bit, but this is how Marcus Freeman's defense was advertised. Mark Freeman it was kind of, a boomer bust gamble type of a defensive coordinator. And that's, like I say, how it was advertised and how it's been advertised, throughout, his time as a defensive coordinator. And, we've seen that today. Um, Jack Kaiser became, the first defensive player to get into the end zone twice in one season since Julian Love in 2017. This is because obviously he returned that interception against Wisconsin. Obviously, he got one today. Poetic justice for getting that fumble that wasn't a fumble on one play, and then I believe it was 2 plays later, intercepts it and actually makes it to the end zone on the next one. So, Marcus Freeman's defense put up 14 points today. I mean, they outscored, Notre Dame theoretically could have gone water boy offense and kneeled down the whole time and still won this game. So, Marcus Freeman, I know there was a lot of, he was built up as a great recruiter, and then it was like, oh my gosh, he's a great recruiter, but is he any good as a football coach? I think now the jury is no longer out. Marcus Freeman is indeed a football coach who knows what he's doing. I don't know. I just think that the things that were said about him as a coach at the beginning of the season after a couple of weeks were unwarranted. And he's really settled in nicely to, calling a very nice defense for the Fighting Irish. So if you're just tuning in, this is the voice of college football, Mark Rogers TV. Coming to you after a very big, very convincing Notre Dame football win over Georgia Tech, 55-0. I'm your host, Ben Belden. And like I say, I'm solo here. The other kind of normal host, Nathan Urbach, was in South Bend for this particular game, so he was unable to join me. I decided to go solo here. So like I say, if you've got comments over the course of the next half hour or so that we'll be on here, or at least we're going to try to be on here as we kind of reach peak listenership right now. If you've got comments, please send them my way, because, if not, I'm going to get on rambling tangents and all of that. So if you got a question or something you want me to talk about, or an opinion you want me to react to, by all means, go on here and let me know what that question or opinion is. Because, like I say, I only have so much more to talk about. And I'm going to ramble here at some point. So, as we kind of, wait here and listen for some more comments, I guess, I've talked about some of the things that I've liked throughout the season from Notre Dame as they've improved from, a team that looked really, really, really shaky throughout the season to a team that, obviously is competing for a college football playoff. I mentioned the defensive line. And that being the number one reason why I think that if Notre Dame were to make the college football playoff against a team like Georgia, or a team like Ohio State, or a team like Cincinnati again, or whoever it is, Notre Dame's defensive line and their defensive line alone makes them at least have a chance against some of those teams. I mean, if you can't run the ball, if you can't get passes off, if you can't do those types of things like we saw today with a mobile quarterback who, Jordan Yates, who honestly feel a little bit bad for, if Notre Dame can win when they're on defense, if they can win the line of scrimmage, obviously that gives them a very, very good chance to win. So, that's exactly why I think Notre Dame, like I say, can be a college football playoff contender. Got another question here from Johnny Bays. What's Hamilton's status moving forward? I mean, I think that's anybody's guess, really, at this point. I mean, I know Brian Kelly has been in the media saying that, at one point he said, I expect Kyle Hamilton to play again. That was a few weeks ago. The more recent news is, and I forget his exact comment, but he essentially said, well, he's probably done for at least the rest of the regular season, and then we'll reevaluate what happens with him in the month of January or late December there, whether that means Notre Dame's playing in a college football playoff or New Year's Six Bowl or whatever the situation is. Sort of sounds like Hamilton would want to play maybe if they were in the college football playoff. I mean, that's me reading between the lines. Maybe not so much if it was just a kind of a regular bowl game. But it's really hard to tell. That the injury that he has. I mean, I'm no doctor, but Google told me that it's kind of a hit or miss type of an injury. Everybody reacts to it a little bit differently. So he's not been cleared to play. He probably won't play. And I don't know. We'll see. As the rest of November unfolds, and then that first week of December, getting the college football playoff ranking. We'll sort of see what the rumblings are on Kyle Hamilton. Emma Leahy says Coach Freeman is setting up for a head coaching gig. Can't disagree there, really. I think that I don't know. There's a lot of talk about that. And even Brian Kelly, there was the whole thing, before the season basically saying, my defensive coordinator is going to be the next head coach. And, there was the whole talk about, well, did he mean at Notre Dame? Is he the head coach in waiting at Notre Dame? Which he's not. I mean, not yet, at least. I think Coach Freeman is going to end up being a really good head coach someday. I genuinely hope he stays in South Bend. And, I think honestly, he's said that he doesn't seem like the type of guy that's just going to bounce, for 1 year. After 1 year, I guess is what I mean to say. So hopefully he sticks around. Hopefully he sticks around and becomes the next Notre Dame head coach after 2 or 3 more years. And when Brian Kelly decides to hang it up, that would be my optimal scenario. And I think there's a legitimate chance that happens. Like I say, there's been certainly he wouldn't be the first Notre Dame assistant coach to go one and done, and go somewhere else and where recruiting might be a little easier, and he's setting himself up for a head coach gig and all of that stuff. I'm looking at you, Mike Elko. So, but I don't know. I think that Marcus Freeman really likes his life at Notre Dame right now. Certainly if for some reason he were able to, go and coach at Ohio State, something like that, that would be hard for him to turn down. But anyway, we could talk about, Coach Freeman and his coaching opportunities, all over the place. Just reading through some of the comments that are coming in here. Obviously, talking about Emma's last name, Leahy. Obviously, if you're a Notre Dame fan, there's not a whole lot better last names to have than Leahy. Anyway, okay, sorry. And like I say, before I started getting into some comments there, what I was hoping to do is transition and talk a little bit about the offensive side of the football. I've made mention throughout this show, particularly that Notre Dame has really, really put it together at the right time. And, at the beginning of the season and throughout the season, we've heard Brian Kelly say things like this is going to be a transitional year for Notre Dame football. And he's been right, as you've watched, kind of the turning of the page for Notre Dame football, as the months has turned, obviously we're playing really well in the month of November. The defense certainly has played better because, like I say, you can't, they haven't given up a touchdown in the month of November yet, but really on the offensive side of the football, I think that's kind of the biggest place where we've seen such a noticeable turnaround, particularly on the offensive line. There were times throughout this season where people were calling for Jeff Quinn's head and that type of stuff. And people were just, myself included, just bashing on the offensive line. And rightfully so. I mean, it was bad to get to a point to where they are now with that offensive line. And, it's almost baffling Because you heard the things like, well, one of the things, the problem with the offensive line isn't talent, it's cohesion. And, you know, Brian Kelly was quoted as saying things like, it's not a Jeff Quinn problem. It's a cohesion problem. It's an experience problem on the offensive line. I can't, and you always wonder, to what extent is that true? I think Notre Dame has very much proven that true so far. Mike McDonald has chimed in that says, I just can't recall a team that has made such a noticeable improvement week to week as this group. And when he says this group, I think he means, just the whole team in general. And I agree. And like I say, a lot of that just comes from, the offensive line playing so much better than it was at the beginning of the season. I mean, it's hard to Notre Dame didn't even look like it deserved to be ranked at the beginning of the year, beating bad teams like Toledo and Florida State, who is really, I thought maybe would end up being a little bit better than people thought they would be, beating, at the time struggling with Purdue, who has looked a lot better, losing ugly to Cincinnati, Virginia Tech, who just fired their coach. I mean, it truly is remarkable. I can't say it enough times in as many different ways that this team has made leaps and bounds in a way that's made this particular Notre Dame football season very enjoyable to watch. Like I say, it was not fun to watch Notre Dame football at the beginning of the year because you have certain expectations as a Notre Dame fan. And even when they're winning, sometimes it's hard to be real excited about an ugly win against a bad team. And now we're no longer at a point where we have to worry about ugly wins against bad teams, which is why, circling back to, what I talked to earlier, that, Notre Dame made a statement to the college football playoff today that they're no longer the team that lost to Cincinnati. They're no longer the team that, played with and almost lost to Toledo had it not been for, kind of a nice, remarkable drive. They're no longer the team that barely got by at Virginia Tech. I think this is a completely different Notre Dame football team that's playing really well on both sides of the football. And you're starting to see them all put it together. And like I say, the exciting part of all that really is that they don't lose a ton moving forward. Certainly, Jack Cohn is not going to be there next year. I doubt Kyron Williams is going to be there next year on the defensive side of the football. You lose MTA and Kurt Heinisch and, probably also Kyle Hamilton and a bunch of other guys, a couple other guys who are key guys. But you're starting to see, like I say, there's depth there. I mean, you're going to replace Kurt Heinisch and Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa with, who knows who, but, Riley Mills has stuck out. You never know who's going to come and who's going to go between, the Adamola twins and Howard Cross and Jacob Lacey and all these guys that they have on the inside. And certainly you're going to lose, 2 starters at least, probably 3 on the offensive line. But really, I think, you're getting to a point where you can sort of see, well, Notre Dame's going to lose, 8 to 9 starters more than likely. But with the depth that they have and the guys that are getting, significant playing time, you're not going to see a huge noticeable drop off from the guys. Talking about the offensive line, like I say, Johnny Bays, thanks for being here and commenting quite a bit. You're helping me out and giving me talking points quite a bit. I wanted to talk about this particular comment and a couple other comments that Johnny's made throughout this show, that it says it all starts with the scheme and play calling. So I have to give a lot of credit to Tommy Rees. I think that's a great point, honestly. Again, talk about coordinators and getting I guess getting criticism. Tommy Rees, all he's done is continue to develop this Notre Dame offense. That's the true mark of a coach, in my opinion. I mean, certainly things were a little bit wobbly and a little bit shaky at the beginning of the season. But Tommy Rees, to his credit, has stayed the course. Called some really cool plays throughout the game today. That screen pass to Logan Diggs was one that was, a nice setup. And I know that's not the first time we've seen that play, but getting Chris Tyree on the field with Logan Diggs, motioning Tyree out, having a little bit of misdirection to a screen pass to Diggs that ended up in I believe it was a touchdown, unless I'm crazy. You saw Jack Cohn get time and throw some people open. You saw some receivers break open. And, you can just, again, I've said it probably 10 times throughout this particular show, that, Notre Dame's peaking. They're just peaking at the right time. I mean, we might as well just call this the Notre Dame, the peak game. Is Notre Dame peaking in time for the college football playoff? Was it too little, too late? Certainly right now you look back and you say, man, does that game against Cincinnati hurt? Because if that game is next week, that's how Notre Dame ends their season, or, they played them one of the last 3 weeks, you think Notre Dame probably wins that game. If Notre Dame plays Cincinnati again, you feel like Notre Dame wins fairly easily based off of how Cincinnati has done and how Notre Dame is playing now. If they play 10 times, does Notre Dame win 7 or 8 of those? And I think the answer is yes. So I think I think that like I say, Notre Dame is just, they're putting it all together in a way that it is really exciting to see. I'm going to go back to Emma here. She says, not to be a Debbie Downer, but the offensive line is not close to being good enough to compete for a national championship. Splash of reality. That's an interesting comment, because I don't necessarily strongly agree, nor do I strongly disagree with that comment. Let's put it bluntly. If Notre Dame were to make the college football playoff and say they play a 1 seed, and say that's they're playing against a 1 seed against Georgia. Certainly, yes, Notre Dame is going to struggle offensively against a team like Georgia with a great athletes all over the field. A defensive line that, it's Georgia. So how much more do you have to say? And a defense that has just really stymied a lot of the opponents that they've played throughout the season. So yeah, I do agree. But like I say, the good news is that, certainly there are teams in the college football playoff that are ahead of Notre Dame that you would like to see them stack up again. They could stack up against better than others. Georgia, I think, would be an interesting matchup because I think both of those teams, the strength certainly is their defense. I mean, Georgia fans right now are still arguing. If you go onto any Georgia message board, they're still arguing about who the quarterback is and who the quarterback should be and how much this quarterback should play versus how much that quarterback should play, and this and that and everything else. And it sounds a whole awful lot about like what Notre Dame fans were talking about early on in the season. And so, I think, it wouldn't be the worst matchup in the world to see Georgia, because I just don't think Georgia run away with it on the offensive side of the football. I don't think they're good enough to run away with it on the offensive side of the football. And I think Notre Dame could stack up. It would be an interesting matchup at the very least. I don't know right now that I would want to see Notre Dame stack up against Ohio State the way that Ohio State is moving the ball and scoring. So I don't know. Again, there are so many different permutations and combinations, but as we see, I mean, just by default today, Notre Dame is at least one step closer to sneaking into the college football playoff for the sole purpose that Ohio State beat a team that's ahead of Notre Dame. If you ask my opinion, Ohio State will beat another team that's ahead of Notre Dame this coming Saturday. And all of a sudden, that's at least getting Notre Dame up to 6. If Georgia beats Alabama and Alabama has 2 losses, it's hard for me to think that an Alabama team with 2 losses is going to get in over Notre Dame. So there's three. Certainly there's the point that was made today that Notre Dame went ahead and put 55 on Georgia Tech and dominated and didn't mess around in a way that they often do against lesser opponents, because they know that Georgia and Georgia Tech play next week. And if Georgia, only beats Georgia Tech 24-7, 31-7, whatever the situation is, then, against a common opponent, Notre Dame ends up looking pretty good, especially if Alabama goes ahead and beats Georgia and Notre Dame and Georgia are sitting there with one loss at the end of a season. I mean, against the only common opponent that they play, Notre Dame dominated, and maybe Georgia doesn't look quite as good. We'll see how that game goes next week. So, I think without, and now we're, sitting here checking off boxes of teams that won't be ahead of Notre Dame anymore. Michigan State and Michigan probably are two of those teams. I mean, and if Michigan goes ahead and beats Ohio State next weekend, then certainly Ohio State's that team. But regardless, one of those teams will have two losses. So Notre Dame is gonna, be right on the outside looking in. And when somebody stubs their toe, which always seems to happen, I think that I don't know. It would be a real, almost ridiculous, crazy thing to say that after what we saw at the beginning of the season, Notre Dame sneaks into the college football playoff after a championship weekend. It's something that looks more and more like it could be a reality, especially given that Oregon is going to play a ranked Utah team twice, probably before the end of the season. Once, I believe tonight. I'd have to check to see exactly when that game starts. And then in the Pac-12 championship. So I don't know. So hello to the Bama fan that's in here. Okay, 10-1. That's good. All right, welcome to the Notre Dame stream. So, I don't know. I think we've rambled on. I mean, like I say, if you're just coming in here because you got done watching Alabama, or you just got done watching some of the 3:30 games that are still kind of wrapping up, welcome. This is the Notre Dame postgame show on the voice of college football, and that's Mark Rogers TV. Thanks for joining me. Like I say, I'm Ben Belden. You can find me on Twitter at RealBBelden. I am a pretty regular guest on this particular post-game show, along with Nathan Erbach, who, like I say, can't be with us here this evening, simply because he was in attendance for Notre Dame. And that's kind of, if you know anything about Nathan, he lives in Las Vegas. So anytime he gets to go out to Notre Dame, that's going to be a big thing for him. So, happy for him getting to do that. And, and like I say, I've carried the load of this post-game show solo this week. So certainly I've appreciated your comments throughout the show. It's certainly difficult to get behind a microphone and talk for 43 minutes when you don't have anybody necessarily to talk to. So thank you for your comments, and thank you for helping kind of keep this show going. So the last thing I'll say as I kind of get to about the 45-minute mark, if I don't get any more comments, we'll kind of wrap up with this thought. And I was kind of saving it for the end on purpose, that, I made mention of, this was a particularly interesting game in terms of the fact that, Notre Dame, it was their senior day today. And I guess I'll leave with the sentiment that, really, I don't know which of the, some of these seniors that were announced today could come back for another year as a graduate student, because they've got a year of eligibility left. Notre Dame doesn't really differentiate between leaving and going and that type of stuff. They really use senior day, and Brian Kelly said this, and I think the way he put this to this week was kind of the appropriate way to put it. He was asked if, there was ever any thought about honoring Notre Dame football players who were juniors, but would be, leaving and moving on to the NFL or transferring or whatever the situation is. And he said, really, the spirit of senior day is honoring these guys who are getting their degrees from Notre Dame. And so certainly, some of the guys today, have chances to come back Um, some of the guys that weren't honored today also won't be back. There's a lot of question marks, and when it comes to personnel, I think Nathan and I talked last week about how theoretically Jarrett Patterson could come back for another year if he wanted to. Really solidify himself as the best center in college football. I mean, that's kind of a stretch, but certainly there are some guys when you got a team as good as Notre Dame and as deep as Notre Dame, and there are going to be guys that are unhappy with the snaps they're getting, and they're going to look to transfer and go elsewhere. So regardless, the guys that were honored today, and you think about, certain specific ones, Kurt Heinisch, a 60-year guy at Notre Dame, certainly has put in time, and has been a main staple of what Notre Dame has done on the defensive line for, it's seemingly forever now. And, guys like, I don't know, like I say, I mentioned Jarrett Patterson, and even, Josh Lugg, who's been a guy who came to Notre Dame, and we've certainly had our criticisms of Josh Lugg and what he's done this year, but has just been a solid Notre Dame player, and really done what was asked of him, and got a chance to start his whole senior year, and even into the graduate transfer type guys like Kane Madden and Jack Cohn. Jack Cohn came in and was one of those guys that, he certainly had a ton of criticism. And certainly endured a lot as people called for Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner at different points in the season. Somebody earlier made the point that they were glad that Notre Dame was able to stick with Jack Cohn throughout the season, because he's really blossomed into a really nice quarterback for Notre Dame. And I can't seem to find that now. It was Johnny Bays, who I know has kind of since signed off there, but Notre Dame was able to develop an offense, like Johnny was saying here in this comment, that he's glad that we stuck with Cohn and developed the offense around the things that he does. I think he hit the nail on the head there, that the Jack Cohn came into a situation where, one of the most criticized people in the world behind the president is the Notre Dame quarterback, it seems like. So, came into a position where Notre Dame needed him to kind of be the carryover guy for Tyler Buckner or I guess Drew Pine or somebody else, or a transfer for next year. And he stepped in there. He did that. And, certainly we thank him for that. And then really, to kind of cap this off, I guess, you got to feel good for Myron Tungavailoa Amosa. And the things that he was able to do getting into the end zone on senior day was certainly probably the highlight in terms of feel good moments for the season. You got to feel great for the kid. He's put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, getting into the end zone in his last game at South Bend, especially after enduring the loss of his father earlier this year. Forcing a fumble against Toledo, which really kind of capped that game just the week after, I believe, that his father had passed away. Certainly Myron Tungavailoa Amosa will be one of those names that goes down in Notre Dame lore, for a very long time, because of his, and even his mother mentioned it. He loves Notre Dame. He loves the university. He loves his professors, his teammates, his coaches. Just an overall great guy. So, as I kind of sign off here, I guess it's worth mentioning and saying thank you to those seniors, and just saying to the Notre Dame fans that listen to this, who have listened to this, that I hope we don't take this team for granted. It would be easy, and it would have been easy to kind of write this team off as not being very good or whatever the situation is. A team that struggled, and this, like I say, I think this might end up being one of my favorite Notre Dame teams, and that's kind of what I'm getting to in a roundabout way. Just the way that they were able to really turn the corner, to take some criticism, to come together, to be on the edge of the college football playoff after where they were is truly remarkable. So, college football playoff or not, this has been a successful Notre Dame season. Thank you to the seniors. Thank you to those that who aren't seniors but won't be with the Notre Dame football program next year. It's worth mentioning those guys as well. But until next time, obviously there's work to do. Notre Dame, like I say, goes out to Stanford next week, hoping to hoping to cap off an 11-1 season. We hope the 5th straight season of 10+ wins in South Bend. That was achieved today. And we'll see if Notre Dame can go the entire of November without giving up a touchdown. That would be pretty special. So that's really it from me. Like I say, if you've been here and you've commented, I really appreciate you. Those of you that will watch this back, make sure that you join us next week. As you know, Nathan and I assume we'll be back together for that particular post-game show. And until next time, go Irish. Hope you've enjoyed the show today at the voice of college football, Mark Rogers TV. Make sure you check out markrogerstv.com and subscribe to his college football shows, and particularly the Notre Dame channel if you've liked this content. So until next time, go Irish. Thanks for watching.